All right, so we've talked about what a service is. The next thing to look at is how do we actually create a service? Now, there are a number of different ways to create a service, and they vary in complexity. So one of the places we want to start, of course, is kind of what's the easiest way for us to create a service? And that's what's called an on-demand started service. And what it really means is that when you have something for it to do, you just kind of hand off some work to it. If the service isn't running, it starts up. It does whatever work you give to it, and then it runs to completion, and then it shuts itself back down. If you keep giving more work to it, it keeps running until you stop. And to simplify creating this kind of service, because this kind of service serves well in so many cases, the Android provides a class for us called Intent Service. And it encapsulates pretty much all of the kind of housekeeping stuff that goes on when creating an on-demand service. All right, so we're going to create a service based on the Intent Service class. Okay, well, it's a simplified wrapper. And what I mean by that is that it actually handles pretty much all the complexities that go with creating a service. And we'll talk a lot more about the details of what's going on under the covers in a little bit later. But the good news is it lets us not focus on those. And it really lets us focus on the tasks that we want to do. The downside, of course, is that it also hides a lot of the capabilities of services. Right? So it actually kind of, although in terms of hiding that complexity, also hides a lot of the features. So that we'll see that for certain kinds of services, this Intent Service works very well. In other cases, we wouldn't want to use that class. But bottom line is that it does all the background work for us. It takes care of starting up. It takes care of queuing things into the background. So it works really well for a lot of cases where you might use a simple thread to do something. Because basically what it does is that when you start it up, it goes ahead and creates a worker thread. And as you pass requests to it, it just hands off that work to the worker thread. So if you give it multiple things to do, it does them serially. Or it does them in the background, but it does one after the other after the other. When there's no more work for it to do, it shuts itself down. All right, so how do we do that? How do we actually create a service using the Intent Service class? So basically, we just go ahead and create a new class. That class inherits from, or in Java terms, extends the Intent Service class. And basically, you have to provide two methods. You have to provide a constructor that calls the superclass constructor, and all you do with that is just give that a string value that's used to name the thread for the service. And that's really just kind of useful for debugging if you want to see the thread that's doing the work for you. The other thing you do is that you override a method called onHandleIntent. And so basically, each time the service is given some work to do, that work, the class goes ahead and just calls its onHandledIntent method. And as with many things in Android, the way work is actually handed to the service is by using an intent. Then once you have your class created, as is the case with most components in Android, in order to make them visible, you have to actually add the service to your manifest. So you basically just, inside of your application element, you just add a service element. And the only thing you have to do is identify the name of the class implementing the service, and just provide a label that's used for any messaging.